Hey Gary, welcome to our show. I'm very happy to have you.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here. Happy New
Yeah,
Year.
thank you. Happy New Year to you too and all the listeners. It's the first episode in this new year, and I'm sure it's going to be very exciting. As you told me about your story on burnout and in your field of you've been a neurosurgeon. So can you tell us maybe more about that and a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Well, I certainly was trained and worked in neurosurgery for decades. I actually hung up the scalpel a couple of years ago, actually because of some neurologic illness of my own, but spent decades in neurosurgery as a very active neurosurgeon and ran a academic neurosurgery program and residency training program at Virginia Tech in Virginia in the United States. And neurosurgery is a demanding field. There's no two ways about it. And it comes with a whole boatload of its own stressors. But what had happened and how I kind of got into the burnout world, because frankly, I was very much just focused on the neurosurgery side of it all for many years. But when I was leading a team, and I had a large team of many neurosurgeons, residents, physician assistants, nurses, technicians, that sort of thing. We had quite a large team. And I think we were delivering exceptional care to our patients. But what was happening was I started getting complaints about my team pretty much nonstop for years. And they just kept getting worse and worse. And they weren't complaints about quality of work, they were complaints about behavior of team members, everybody on the team, myself included, not acting appropriately, not acting well, acting out, making people feel uncomfortable, being overly sarcastic or nasty, making people cry. I mean, just not interacting well with our fellow healthcare workers. And it reached such a toxic point that I felt like I had to do something, and I began looking into the world of burnout. And it really started to dawn on me that what was happening was most likely that my team was burning out, that me included, and my team were burning out. And with the burnout, just kind of idiosyncrasies, if you will, of our personalities were coming to the fore, and it wasn't going well in the workplace there. So I happened to be able to run into and work with kind of a world expert. His name's Wayne Sotil, but a world expert on physician burnout. And we dove into working with my team for several years. But the reason why I guess I'm such a zealot, if you will, is that the results were tremendous. Doing some work on building resilience, building the wellness of our team over the space of really several months, we began to start seeing amazing results where the complaints dropped to zero. We stopped getting complaints about the behavior, and soon people were actually congratulating our team and giving my team awards and all this sort of thing in the workplace there. So it really hit me that this was a real thing, and I'm sure is everywhere, not just in medicine, but everywhere in this kind of high charged, multitasked world that we all live in. And I think, you can look at it in a classic sense and say, oh, is this true burnout or not burnout? I don't know. But I know that one of the things that we really see is people aren't themselves. They aren't the people they want to be, the people that they, would like to be. And I think it's all a sign of burnout in this modern world.
Yeah, that's very interesting actually, because lots of things that you are saying, I think it resonates with too many people in their like workplaces. Even with me now, I get some memories and flashbacks from previous workspaces where we were noticing these toxic behaviors, and we usually call it a toxic work environment, but without having a proper reason for that mainly. But now it's very interesting to see it from the perspective of a burnout, and even people who are finding themselves in such toxic places. It might be actually kind of a group burnout for these people and teams. And how do you like, I'm interested about comparing this with the individual burnout. How does that compare? Does it affect only the workplace, or does it affect your life outside of work as well?
Yeah, that's all great questions, Albert. The, you know, I think an individual who is burning out and is sinking into bad behaviors and behaviors that they would not want to be in, they become a ripple in a pond. In other words, they're going to affect everybody around them, and it's just going to put other stressors on their team members who are probably already struggling with things like burnout themselves, and then they're going to carry it home. The two are not inseparable. Your outside life and your at work life, they're not separable at all. In fact, you can burn out at home just as much as you can burn out at work, and you may be bringing your burnout at home to work. Even if work was at some point a refuge, it's going to affect it there. So they're all interlaced, they're all interwoven, and you can't separate out one from another. And again, this idea of a ripples in a pond, bad adaptive behaviors spread, bad attitudes spread very quickly amongst groups and people and families and friends. But on the flip side, good behaviors, adaptive behaviors, things that improve our lives, that build our resilience, that build our wellness, also will spread if we bring it to a area of our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can come back to this later, but I'm actually curious about the burnout relation to stress. Because do you think that burnout is simply a result of chronic stress, or how do you compare both of them? And what is as you mentioned, it's like a ripple effect. So how do you think it's like contagious, and so to say, in the workplace?
Yeah, we know burnout is a response to stress, either large scale stress or small scale chronic stress. And again, in our world, in our modern world, it's not one little thing that's stressing us out. It's a million things going on at once. So when we studied this, for example, we wrote a few books on it, and we kept it in the medical realm. But in the medical realm, we outlined, I don't know, something like 70 different independent stressors that were very common for the practicing physician or practicing healthcare worker. And they can be very little things. They can be major things like death of a patient, obviously, but also just, internal conflicts and stress with your system, and being multitasked, and not having time to stay physically healthy, and not eating well. I mean, you can go on and on and on, and you stack up this list of stressors, and people are particularly prone, are intelligent, highly motivated people who want to get something done, and then they feel like they're walking in quicksand or something as they're trying to get things accomplished, and all these stressors start to mount up. I think one of my favorite metaphors right now for it is the idea that we all kind of have a bank of energy within ourselves, this energy it takes to get up and do things, to interact with the world, to get things accomplished. And the things that we encounter day to day either are going to make deposits in these banks, or they're going to make a withdrawal. And if you think about all the stressors of our days, there could be a lot of withdrawals being made all the time, both from the system itself, but also our interactions with other people. And so to me, a state of burnout would be a state where you're just overdrawn. You've made so many withdrawals that even when you make deposits, it's just not having an impact. So if you enter into a situation where everybody's already facing a lot of stressors, already having a lot of withdrawals, thrown at them, and you come in and you're unpleasant, you're difficult to deal with, and you're looking for a fight, you're sarcastic and not helping get things accomplished and being overly critical, well, that's just going to be making further withdrawals upon them as well as yourself. And so, yeah, it becomes very easy to be that epicenter of ripples in a pond, negative ripples in a pond.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And all this story, it reminds me of a place that I worked in. I was actually a contractor, like kind of a freelancer in this company, but everybody there was very stressed and the workplace was very toxic. Like everybody is chit-chatting behind their backs and making sarcastic jokes and everything. But the interesting point here is that since I was an kind of an outsider there and I was like a freelancer, I noticed all these behaviors and I was like, what the hell is going on there? But for the people themselves, for some reason, they were kind of adapted. They got adapted to this environment and it became sort of normal. So here I'm curious, like, is it really a thing that you might not be aware of it and you kind of adapt to this situation over after exposure for a long period of time, for a prolonged time? And how do you actually build awareness of your situation in this
Yeah.
case?
Geez, what a great question, and what a super observation of it. Particularly, I like that idea of when you come in as an outsider and you look around sometimes and you go, "What the heck is this?" And I'm going to give you just a quick aside because I challenged my friend Wayne Sotil, about physicians because he had treated something like 13,000 physicians in his time. But I said, Wayne, how many of the people who are really problematic, who are troubled, are burned out, and how many are just jerks? Like, when you came into that workplace, is it just that they're all jerks? They've somehow selected out a bunch of jerks. And his response was, look, through the years and working with all these people, what I realize is the grand majority are wonderful, lovely people. They are good people. Maybe 5% are in the jerk category, and all the rest are good people who have just run out of the energy to contain themselves. So I think, Albert, in certain situations, certain patterns of behavior become, just become ingrained, and they're maladaptive behaviors. They're not good behaviors. They're not, working towards the better good, but they somehow, I don't know, expend some of the angst, some of the anxiety, and help temporarily with the people's stressors, but in the long term aren't helping at all. So you can see these kind of workplace behaviors that get ingrained, and they're negative and they're corrosive, and yet they're there and they're almost institutionalized. So one example I would have in the medical world that I've seen a lot, and I think this occurs in other high stress industries as well. But in the medical world, there seems to be often what I call a suffering contest, where everybody just wants to be able to outsuffer each other. At least they want to claim that they're outsuffering each other. Oh, I got here, all of last week, and I came in to work at 6:30 in the morning. Oh, yeah, well, I was coming in at 6 o'clock in the morning. Oh, well, I was staying till 9 o'clock. Yeah, I was staying to 9:30. They're always trying to trump each other in how miserable they are, as opposed to, having a contest of, hey, I got home and actually was able to have dinner with my family this week and celebrate the good stuff. So how do you break out of that? How do you do better than that? Well, what we've advocated is, kind of two-tiered. One is these institutions, these workplaces, these industries, I think need to pay attention to the toxicity of the workplace and to the stressors that are involved, and need to address that. I mean, they have to be part of it, and it pays off, because if you have a workforce that isn't burnt out, their productivity is going to be better. So it's good to invest in it as an industry, as a company as well. But we also recognize that often that's not going to happen, and we have to treat ourselves. We have to work on ourselves so that we're not sucked up into that vortex, if you will. So we always say you got to start, from square one. You start with yourself. And it's hard to do sometimes because you'll feel guilty. You'll feel like, oh, I shouldn't be paying attention to myself. I should be paying attention to these problems or these people. But you got to start with yourself, and you have to spend some time and look into, how am I doing? How am I feeling? How am I fitting into this workplace? Am I falling victim to the way they're behaving? And is there a better way? Can I do better than this? What makes me feel good? What makes me feel bad? What brings me down? What lifts me up? What makes those deposits in that bank we were talking about? What makes all the withdrawals? And can I work on all that? Even if I can't stop the withdrawals, is there a way I can react to the stressors in such a way that they're not making as big a withdrawal? But if we don't start by focusing on ourselves, how are we going to address it? How are we going to build our own resilience? And step two then would be to grant yourself permission to do something about it, to actually, once you figure it out, is to actually take care of yourself, to do some self-care. So, the first opening salvo is no guilt for self-compassion and self-care, and then we build out from there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really fascinating how this concept of like employee wellness is not. I think it's not yet there for most of the companies, and yeah, they really need to pay attention to that. And coming back to building resilience part, so you mentioned some of the things, and having been dealing with that yourself, what are some practical things you can give us maybe to overcome this burnout? How did you deal with it back then, and what do you offer some advices?
Yeah, when we were putting together the books, for example, I don't know, we cycled through maybe 60, 70 different strategies, if you will, that people could try to help them with various stressors. And what we found is a few things. One of the big things to recognize is that what works for Peter doesn't work for Paul necessarily. So, if somebody comes out with this is the universal resilience builder, and if you do this, you will absolutely never have burnout ever again. I would run in the other direction screaming, because I think different people need different things. For example, we know that things like meditation and mindfulness and focus help a lot of people. Well, it doesn't do a darn thing for me. I'm just not able to do it successfully. It does not work. But there are other things that do work for me. Another thing that happened, when we put these books out, was a lot of people said, oh, these solutions, they're just common sense. They're just too simple. Why aren't you getting into the deep, deep Freudian psychology of and we're like, if we get into massive psychobabble on all this stuff, nobody's going to pay attention. They're just going to throw it away, as opposed to simple things that we can do. So I'll just give you, one example or a couple of examples. One I think that is very effective for a lot of people is it's kind of a shift in frame of reference. And what it is to, for 2-3 weeks, force yourself every day when you go into work or wherever your stressful situation is, but every day, with a little piece of paper or with your phone, look around as the day goes on and write down 5 positive things that happen, 5 good things that happen. It doesn't have to be super profound. It could be someone saying thank you. It could be somebody smiling at you. It could be a great song that you haven't heard in 5 years that brought back good times for you. It could, those sort of things. Or something worked right at work, and went the way it was supposed to. But write down 5 things a day. And when you get home, particularly just before you go to bed at night, review them. Just look at them and review and say, a few things happened good today. And do it for 2 to 3 weeks. And the fun thing about it is it trains your brain. And after 2 to 3 weeks, what happens is you don't have to force yourself. You don't have to make yourself do it. Your brain will start hunting out those positive things that are happening, in your day. And all of a sudden, what's happening is you're shifting your frame of reference. You're picking up on the positive things rather than all the stressors. So you begin to see the world not as a complete stress cauldron, but also good things are happening. And it's just a simple thing, like I said, nothing very profound about it, but it really has major positive effects.
Right, right. Yeah, this is very insightful. And I think this method is called like gratitude journal, keeping gratitude journal.
Right. You can, it's an exercise in gratitude for sure. And, you know, you can take it that one step further and really at night when you're looking over these things, really meditate upon it, really think about and really express your gratitude. But you don't even have to go that far. You just look at them and say, oh, yeah, a few good things, happened today. And so little things like that, when you repeat them, and I think this is a big one, Albert, is, and I joke about it all the time because, as you pointed out, a lot of industries are not really diving into this, and they recognize it. They see the writing on the wall. They see that there probably is some validity to this, but they're pretty cynical about it. So what they'll do is they'll bring somebody like me in for 2 hours to drone on in front of an audience about how they need to build their resilience. Or they might bring in a bunch of puppies and let people pet them. Or they have, bake a bake sale or something and say, okay, we've worked on everybody's resilience and they should be better now. And the reality is there is no epiphanies in this. All the things that are going to build your resilience are going to restore those energy levels. They have to be chronic too. You have to go at them day to day, day to day, day to day. And they take you investing some energy up front, but in the long run will pay off because they will pay you back in much bigger surges of energy. But it isn't going to happen by one day of, petting puppies.
Yeah, absolutely. This reminds me of the how companies like throw in a party for every like few months or some team activity and think that wow, we nailed it. Like all
Yeah,
people should be
exactly.
happy now. Yeah, I think it's very important to see it from the perspective of being chronic as well as the stressors, because to counter the effect of the stressors. So that was, yeah, very interesting. As we are coming to the end of the episode, do you have any like final thoughts, any advice to wrap it up?
Yeah, a couple things. I'm just going to give you another quickie example, is because my team was always getting in trouble on the phone, particularly. It seems like we can misbehave on a phone much easier. And so they were always grumpy and grouchy on the phone. I've seen this in a lot of industries. So a really simple thing that we did is we said, everybody has to sign on to, every time you get on that phone, force a smile. Just make yourself smile while you're talking. It's very hard to be a jerk when you're smiling. So, and it's funny that people came back after doing this again after a couple of weeks and said, "Oh my gosh, I am doing so much better on the phone than I had been just by that simple idea." But it actually gets into neuroscience, Albert. When you get to the neuroscience side of this repeated, repetition of doing positive activities, things that are positive builders, they are networking inside your brain. They are building regions of your brain or strengthening certain connections, because we know from the neuroscience angle that if you stress the brain a lot, if you subject it to terrible stressors, you'll actually shut down certain very positive networks in your brain and start building up your stress networks, the survival networks of your brain. They actually will get stronger, and it's a very negative world there when you think that every minute you may be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger or something. But those are the parts of the brain that you're strengthening if you immerse yourself in that negativity, that negative world. Whereas if you can reinforce the networks in your brain that are much more in your reward systems and your positive systems for, supporting you in what you're doing, it will actually change the neuroconnectivity in your brain. So, this isn't just silly psychobabble. This really gets down into the neuroscience of our brain. So it's worth doing. It's worth really investing yourself in yourself. And you have to keep repeating to yourself, no guilt. I shouldn't feel guilty for taking care of myself, because if I can take care of myself and get myself really healthy, then I can take care of others. Then I can take on the biggest problems. Then I can withstand the stress.
Yeah, very important, I think, this self-compassion and not seeing self-care as a selfish act and not feeling guilty about it. I think this is a very good takeaway for people and listeners. So thank you so much, Gary, for being here. This has been a very exciting conversation.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I think we are just getting slightly below the surface, but I think you really hit on some major important topics.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, and hope to see you soon, maybe to cover up other topics.
Same here.
Awesome.